The Seventh Seal, a journey into silence and meaning. Step into a different time and into a different kind of cinema, where the light falls like confession and silence speaks louder than words.
The film itself informs a lot of our culture in ways that aren't always necessarily obvious. I think it's important for us to look at this movie in a different way than we have before. I'm sure you're familiar with some of the tropes that come from the movie, but perhaps you should see the source. Let's take a look at a part of the movie that's significant. And kind of like we're looking at most of the characters in the movie as different voices within Bergman's psyche. As has been said, we are not one, we are many. And it's also been said our mind is more like a committee, and we have different personas, different selves, and it goes beyond just the person you are at work and the person you are playing golf. It's more than just behavior and surface ideas, but really deep down, we have very different ways of looking at things and coping. And the different characters in The Seventh Seal seem to be Bergman's inner, I was going to say dialogue, but really there's more than two. And it's more like an inner argument, an inner disagreement.
For Bergman, this was no abstraction. He was ill, physically and spiritually, recovering in body and broken in soul. It was during this crisis that he turned to a medieval image from his childhood. Death, pale and calm, playing chess with a man on the edge of eternity.
He is trying to cope with something that has really shattered his world. And there's nothing like trauma to make us pay attention. So Bergman was suddenly paying attention to himself and creating the character of Antonius Block, a man whose own world has been shattered and has forced him to suddenly see himself clearly for the first time. And he has a conversation with death, an interaction with death. And it's this conversation in which we have, I think, Bergman actually talking with something outside of his own head. Death represents the one reality outside of the mind. You can argue that everything we do, it's all a product of our mind. The mind comes first. Our reality tunnel is such that whatever we look at is going to be looked at through the grid of our understanding, of our emotions, of the way we have been trained to look at things by our society, by our past, by our language, by the words, the very words we use are going to in some way influence the way we think about something. Death is the one reality that you come up against that shatters all those illusions. When death comes, we look at it with a face of surprised recognition, as William S. Burroughs said. Death, I think, in this movie is Bergman actually turning outside of himself for the first time. Remember, Antonius talked about how he just spent all his life just living in his own head, basically. Words to that effect. And a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing, as a great writer once said. So I think that if we take a look at what Bergman is saying through Antonius Block to death, and they all interact with death, especially at the end of the film, where you have that tableau, and these are all of his inner characters. These are all of his inner ways of looking at things, because we are different people. We look at something one day, 1 hour, and we have this entirely different attitude to it. We can look at something and say, this is a challenge. I can rise to this, and who knows what opportunities might come up. But then we can look at it again and say, this is hopeless. Why am I wasting my time on this? Why don't I just throw it all aside and do something else? And we can look at it again and just be horrified. How can I do this? How can I be doing this? So facing death, the thing that you have to face, and the thing that Antonius was simply not prepared for, and he thought he was. He had been prepared by his society to live in his society. But when the shell of that society is cracked and the yolk and the white runs out, you got to figure out what the heck is this frying pan I'm in all of a sudden. So I think what we need to do and what we're going to do is to try to get a handle on what's going on in this film by looking at the interactions that Antonius Bloch is having with death. I think these conversations and these interactions are going to be the key to understanding at least part of what's going on here. And this is by no means meant to be a definitive statement of what the movie, quote unquote, means. Like all great works of art, it means a lot of things, and it means them all at the same time. And a lot of things that we simply don't see, a lot of things that Bergman himself didn't see. All great art transcends the artist's understanding of it.
Death is not a villain here. He is patient, almost polite, but he cannot be bargained with. The chess game becomes a metaphor for life, for delay, for dignity in the face of loss. We all play it in one way or another.
Oscar Wilde, who was a very wise man, said something to the effect that artists are not the best people to talk to about their art. They simply can't understand it properly. They're too close to it, and they're artists. That they create the art, but that doesn't mean they understand it. And so, argued Wilde, the need for the critic. He felt that the critic was actually a very important part of the artistic process. The critic is the one who's able to see clearly what the artist's done when the artist can't see for themselves. And I think we've all seen that with works of art that the author probably had no idea of certain things, and yet you and I can read something. Heck, I read Shakespeare, which was written many hundreds of years ago, and I see things that are very relevant to things that are specific to the 20th and 21st century. So all great art transcends the artist. So we're going to try to focus on something that can provide us with a very important key to understanding how this story can be resolved. Because I think when we watch The Seventh Seal, there is a resolution, but I'm not sure if we understand it very well. Every scene in the movie has the presence of death in one way or another, symbolically and sometimes quite literally. This brings it back to the viewer and forces us to look at this one thing that really wakes us up. And when he appears right at the beginning of the film, that face of shocked recognition that Antonius Bloch has, he knows exactly who it is. He's startled, but he also knows. And his body is afraid, but he is not. I love that line.
Listen closely to the silences. Watch how the light moves. Let the questions echo. And perhaps, like the night, you'll hear a whisper, not from above, but from within.
But it is interesting that death appears after he has prayed, and after, in fact, he had a very foreshortened prayer. And when instead of praying, he goes to the chessboard to try to demonstrate agency, he's not saying, not my will, but thine be done. He's saying, my will be done. And that can hit a person really hard. But more than that, he himself, I believe, in the 1950s, you had still a lot of the fallout from Europe having gone through the Second World War. And let's see, he was born in 1918. That was the end of the First World War. So he grew up in a world which had as part of its mythology that we had fought this war to end all wars, that there were not going to be any more wars in Europe because we had this new international system and this and that and the other thing. He was very secure and safe within his little world, and of course raised up a very religious person. He's living in the religious worldview, which coincides quite well with the social worldview of now we're going to have peace on earth, goodwill to men, yada yada, God bless us everyone. And then suddenly World War II happens, and I know you went through a war, but you did not go through carpet bombing and the famine and the horrible conditions. And I've told the story often, and I'll tell it again, of my aunt who was a small child in Germany during the war. And when I asked her what her clearest memory of those years was, she just replied without missing a beat, rubble. As far as the eye could see in every direction, nothing but rubble. This is destruction on a scale that very few of us have experienced.
The film follows his journey through a world on the edge of collapse. Along the way, we meet his loyal squire, a troupe of travelling actors, frightened peasants, a silent woman accused of witchcraft. It's not a quest for victory. It's a pilgrimage of questions.
Bergman's world had definitely been shattered in many ways. And of course, this calls into question his religious beliefs. His ideas about religion and society were at least very much one thing. Add to that the fact that he's in his late 30s. You don't think about death so much when you're young because you've got so much life energy flowing through you. That's one of the reasons why young people take so many chances. They really are not convinced of their own death. But anyone that even went through World War II peripherally, you are reminded of death. And that might be one of the reasons why he chose the Middle Ages, which was a time when death was omnipresent. They didn't just hide dying and dead people away. People died in front of you. And especially the plague, again, something that wiped out, according to some estimates, more than half the population. It's his response. It's his intellectual reaction to this. And in part, he explores other people's reactions, like the flagellants, who are simply throwing a temper tantrum, really. I think it's like, God, pay attention. God, you're not looking at it. And the priest there going on about, you're all gonna die. It's just a scream of anger. It's not prayer and this and that. I'm reminded of the Buddhist story of and I'm sure you're familiar with it, the king when the Buddha says to him, what if I told you there was a mountain coming from the north, crushing everything, destroying everyone and everything, and another one from the south and the east and the west? And the king said, well, what could I do but try to meditate and get my mind right and practice the Dhamma? And of course, the Buddha replied, well, there are these mountains coming, illness, aging, and death, and so forth. These things are inevitable. But until we actually see the mountain and look at it with that face of shocked recognition, we tend to ignore it. So this is his mind, which is still young enough to remember the immortality of youth, being brought to the threshold of recognizing mortality and having enough time before him for him to worry about it, for him to consider it, and for him to still say, what can I do with my life now? Like Antonius Bloch, who simply wanted a few more days so he could do something meaningful, something other than something just playing a game inside of himself, not just a mental taking on an identity in a world of experience in his own mind, but rather looking outward and doing something that he can be proud of, something meaningful. The complete opposite of what he was describing to death when he thought he was a priest.
In a world still haunted by war, by plague, by division, this film still offers a mirror. Not an answer, but a space to ask the question well.
It's Ingmar Bergman trying to wake us up to what he sees too. And maybe that's cruel. Maybe he's an artist, and an artist has to create their art, has to communicate these things. I forget who said it. I think it was Kurosawa who said, being an artist means never turning away from things, always looking at things, never turning away, which is a very frightening thing to do. And here Bergman does not let the audience turn away.
Not all in the film are noble. The squire is cynical. The townspeople are afraid. The world is absurd and cruel. There is no reward for virtue, no clear punishment for sin. This is a world without easy answers, which makes the night's search all the more tragic and all the more human.
We can fortify ourselves with, philosophy, introspection, preparing ourselves mentally and emotionally by whatever means. He found that Christianity no longer provided him with the tools he needed to face this. And many of the tools, again, even in the church, were about ignoring that. The church, as the church is, have moved far away from what they were in the Middle Ages. Someone pointed out that rather than railing against the 7 deadly sins, the 7 deadly sins are, for the most part, very necessary for a successful capitalist society. So most churches don't really care all that much about gluttony or avarice or anything like that. They might get a little upset at you if you have a non-traditional sexual orientation, and not even that anymore. What is left of a church after that but a social club?
Antonius Block is not a man without faith. He's a man tormented by doubt. I want knowledge, he says, not faith, not surmise, but knowledge. He prays, he pleads, he listens into the void, but God does not answer. It is this silence that haunts the film, not just death, but the absence of meaning.
And for a film made at that time, the idea of pushing death was very shocking, because even not so much now, but in the 50s, the whole point, death was very taboo, perhaps especially since so many people had gone through so much of it.
Vem är du?
Jag är döden.
We've had a really, really fantastic talk. I think that's a great introduction to what we're going to do. What are you hoping that our listeners, our viewers, will get out of this series?
I think I hope that any insights we share might be new to them and might give them ideas to explore, building on that, and maybe come up with some ideas that we haven't thought of. Because I find that when people discuss things like this, I like to listen to other people's ideas on the subject. They're not the ones I'm having, but they can illuminate those ideas and give me a new angle, a new way of looking at the film. So maybe what I'm hoping for is that we'll be able to give people a different way to look at the film, enrich their experience of it.